Adams. Okay, and Bill was instrumental in helping refine the list of bird species that was ultimately included in this book. He recommended and lent me many reference books that I used at length, and he very patiently answered a whole lot of my questions, and I appreciate that a whole lot also. And then finally, I'd like to say thank you to Carl Schwartz, because when I was refining this list, I needed the latest Wisconsin Society for Ornithology checklist, and Carl provided that to me. And without that, at that moment, I would have been kind of at a loss. In addition, Carl took up a lot of the work at the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory that I kind of like sloughed off while I worked on this book. So to Carl, I not only thank him for his help, but also for this invitation tonight. Now, about some of the things that I learned while writing this book. I learned a simple, but I think a profound lesson, and that is that Wisconsin is a superb state for bird watching. And it's, and I think it should be, and I think the birds in the state should be a source of great pride for every Wisconsinite. And I would like to spend most of this talk giving you the reasons why I think that is so. There's 5 reasons in particular. The first one is that you can see one heck of a lot of birds here in this state. The second one is Wisconsin's location. Its location on the continent is ideal to see a diversity of birds. And I'll talk about that a little bit later too. And the third thing I've already hinted at, in that this state is fortunate to have an active and welcoming birding community. You always have someone to go birding with here, and I think a meeting like this is evidence of that. The fourth reason is that Wisconsin has a proud history of environmental activism, and I think that that's something that every one of us should keep in mind when we think about our state, the challenges that lie before us as we contemplate environmental issues and conservation in general. You know, we walk in the footsteps of great people, and I think that we should live up to that reputation and be proud of it. And then finally, what everybody knows here, I'm sure in this group, is that you can see birds in Wisconsin in every month of the year, and that really is a unique and wonderful thing, especially when you start comparing Wisconsin to other states in the country. Carl already suggested a little bit about me. He mentioned that I was the director of the Bird City, Wisconsin. I've had that position since 2018. Since 2013, I have been a director of the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory, and I've been chair since 2017. In both capacities, as director of Bird City, Wisconsin and the observatory, I have been trying to fill Carl's big shoes. And it's something that keeps me going all the time. And as Carl mentioned, I'm on the steering committee of the Wisconsin Bird Conservation Partnership. Before that, however, though, I worked just a short walk away from the White House in Washington, D.C. I worked at the American Institute of Architects, where I was the managing editor of the AIA Press. And I published a number of books on the practice of architecture, and also some pretty yummy looking big coffee table books on practicing architects and the buildings that they've put into the world. After that, I moved across the Potomac to the south and worked for many years, for about 13 or 14 years as a staff editor and writer at Time Life Books. And there I worked on all kinds of different topics: home repair and improvement, American history, ancient civilizations and archaeology, space aliens and paranormal phenomena, the Third Reich, and the Wild West. But never once, despite all of our efforts, did I get to work on a book series about birds. To do that, I needed to become the editor-in-chief of what was then Birders World magazine, and subsequently changed its name to BirdWatching. There I had the great good fortune to work with and learn from people like Laura Erickson, Julie Craves, David Sibley, Ken Kaufman, Pete Dunn, and I learned a ton from these brilliant people. And I think because of them, my book turned out a little bit better than it would have if I had never had that opportunity to learn from them. While at Birdwatching magazine, I also worked extensively with a photographer by the name of Brian E. Small. And that's significant because Brian provided not only all the photos for my field guide, but he also provided almost all the photos that you'll see in this talk. Before I wrote the field guide, I worked on I published two other books. The Wings of Spring, featuring the photos of Tom Vizo, and a short ID guide to North American ducks and geese. Both of these were published quite a while ago in 2006. Since leaving the magazine, I've done really what I've wanted to do for ever since I was pretty much a boy, and that is to work as a contract editor and writer, sitting right here where I can make my own coffee and share my editing questions with my dog and listen to good music. I have, in the last few years, I've cold read or proofread or edited books on a number of topics, including spiders, dinosaurs, the birds of Central America, a beautiful book that is out now. Pete Dunn and Kevin Carlson's book on identifying gulls. And in the upper right-hand corner, you see good practices for financial consumer protection. That's a placeholder for all of the work that I've done for the World Bank and International Monetary Fund over the past several years. And down in the lower right-hand corner is the new field guide to birds of Hawaii that came out just, I think, last year. It's another lovely book. I edited that one, and it's in the same series as my field guide. And since I put this slide together, I've had the good fortune to edit a book on common spiders of North America. That'll be coming out, I think, later in 2022 from Princeton University Press. And I recently just finished editing the ABA Field Guide to Birds of Maine, which is written by Nick Lund. That name might be familiar to you because Nick is the outreach and network manager for Maine Audubon. And he's also the creative writer behind the Birdist blog. And he's a pretty darn good writer, and that's it will be a very nice book. My book is in the same series, published by the American Birding Association. My book is slightly larger because it's got a whole boatload of birds in it. It's 368 pages. And we illustrated it with 479 color photos taken by Brian. And they show 299 different species of birds from Wisconsin. The book explains their habits. It describes the sounds they make, tells where and when to find them in the state. And what it really tries to do is it attempts to spark interest in birds, and hopefully enough interest that the readers would feel strongly a kinship for those birds and want to take steps to help us conserve them. The primary goal, as my publisher reminded me often, was to describe the birds that an average bird watcher stands a decent chance of seeing in Wisconsin in a year. And the chief way that we tried to do that was by giving details about when and where to see those birds. The secondary goal was, as much as possible, to try to make those birds memorable. That is, to make them come alive, and to explain what I mean by that, I'm going to give you a peek behind the curtains here. When I started work on this, writing this book, the publisher asked me to send him a dozen writing samples, a dozen sample species accounts, just to make sure that he and I were on the same page about how the book would turn out and what the tone would be. And I did that. And then we talked, and he gave me a whole lot of feedback about how maybe I could revise what I had written. And I did that because his feedback turned out to be pretty good. So I'm going to show you tonight two versions of two species accounts, my first sample draft and a revised draft for two species that you can see in Wisconsin, the snow goose and wood duck. This is the page proof as I received it before. I'm pretty far along in the production process. It's you can see that it is exactly as the page appeared in the book, well, complete with registration marks, trim lines, and up at the top you can see the black and white registration and the color marks. And that's pretty much how it ended up. And this here, well, let me do this here is a screenshot of the actual sample manuscript that I sent to the publisher at the beginning. I'll read it out so you don't have to spend a lot of time if it's not clear on your screen. But what I'd like you to notice is that it opens with field marks, including the field marks of blue goose, and that it mentions Wisconsin only briefly. Really, there's only just like one short sentence about migrants. So here it goes. It goes, snow goose appears in two forms. White morphs are all white except for the primaries, which are black. Adult dark morph snow geese, known as blue geese, have white heads and white feathers on their necks and under the tail, but are black-brown elsewhere. Immature dark morphs have dark heads. Snow geese are common migrants in central Wisconsin and rare winter residents. Members of the booming mid-continent population, they breed in large colonies in Arctic and subarctic Canada and spend the winter from southeastern Nebraska to western Florida, concentrating along the Louisiana and Texas coast. They fly in long diagonal lines or V shapes, calling constantly. And the number in brackets there is my way of keeping track of how many words I write. The 105 there tells you that that is exactly 105 words long. Now here, after some feedback from my editor, is a revised version of that same text. And see if you can tell if there's a slight difference. Snow goose nests in large colonies in Arctic and subarctic Canada and spends the winter from southeastern Nebraska to western Florida, concentrating along the Louisiana and Texas coast. A few hardy individuals may overwinter in Wisconsin, but most are reported during migration. They're observed in spring and fall, paddling on Lake Michigan or resting and feeding in farm fields, wetlands, rivers, and inland waters. Goose Pond near Arlington, Horicon Marsh in Dodge and Fond du Lac counties, and Collins Marsh in Manitowoc County are reliable stopovers. Snow geese fly in long wavy lines. A flock can be very loud. And so whereas my first, or the sample draft, opened with field marks, this one describes the species movements. And whereas my original focused on Wisconsin only briefly, this one focuses strongly on when and where to see snow geese in Wisconsin, and it gives details. It identifies, in fact, it mentions Lake Michigan, Goose Pond, Horicon Marsh, and Collins Marsh. This version, the revised version, makes this account much more useful to a birder who wants to find snow geese in Wisconsin. Here's another example. Again, this is the page proof that I got late in the process, showing a male and a female wood duck, along with a bit of text there. And this here is a screen capture of what I wrote originally. This is my first, or my sample draft. It opens with a very long recitation of field marks, and it mentions again, Wisconsin only briefly. And it doesn't mention vocalizations at all. Here's what it reads like. It's a good description of wood duck. Wood duck looks like no other North American duck. Both sexes have a drooping crest, a small bill, a white throat, and a long rectangular tail, often raised when swimming. Males have dark heads and red eyes and a multicolored bill. Their breast is burgundy with tiny white spots. The flanks are gold and the undertail coverts are reddish violet. Females are gray-brown and have distinctive teardrop-shaped eye patches. Wood ducks nest in tree cavities, including pileated woodpecker holes, and are common breeders along tree-lined streams and in wooded swamps. They also use nest boxes. They are found in winter often, especially in southeastern counties. And here, after consultation with my editor, is how this was revised. The spectacularly marked wood duck looks like no other North American duck, and only a handful share its habit of laying eggs in cavities, including nest boxes. Wood ducks are seen across Wisconsin from March to November, and a few can also be found in the southeastern third of the state in winter. Adept at flying through woods and perching on branches, they favor tree-lined streams and rivers and wooded swamps, marshes and beaver ponds, and make their nests in broken and rotted limbs and old woodpecker holes in trees standing near or in water. Females make a loud ooeek, ooeek call. Males give a soft, upslurred whistle. And this one, whereas the first, my original, started with a long recitation of field marks, this one opens with how unique the wood duck is. It looks like no other duck, and it lays eggs in nest boxes like few other ducks. And it makes clear when wood ducks can be found in Wisconsin. And then it characterizes what the bird is like, flying through woods and perching on branches, and it describes its vocalizations. It makes the bird, I hope, come alive for a reader. This version, in short, tries to make the wood duck memorable. Perhaps it sparks a desire to get out and actually see a wood duck. And perhaps, this is my hope, that this kind of writing might also increase appreciation for wood duck. And not just among experienced birders like you all, but also among average bird watchers. And the reason that this is important, and the reason it became like clearly a driving force for me as I wrote this book, is because we know that populations of North American birds are declining. We know this because of an article that appeared in Science magazine in September of 2019. I'm sure you've heard about it. It was the first comprehensive assessment of net population changes in the United States and Canada in 50 years, since 1970. And it documented declines that the scientists had to call staggering. They realized that the North American bird populations had declined in those 50 years by 2.9 billion breeding birds. Forest birds had declined by 1 billion birds. Grassland birds were down 720 million birds. That's 53% of the grassland population. Migratory birds, like this beautiful Baltimore oriole that you see here on this screen, were down 2.5 billion birds, or 28%. If trends like these continue, I don't need to tell you that we will certainly, for sure, lose species forever. And what was astonishing to me as I worked on this book was that I could see these declines, if only anecdotally, not in a scientific sense. In species after species, using eBird, I compared what had been seen in years past, maybe 10 years, 15, 20 years ago, and what was being seen within the last 10 years. And I saw fewer reported sightings from any bird, not all, but many. And also I could see, because of the great mapping feature on eBird, that the ranges appear to be contracting. And these trends made me wonder if, what if we knew, that we had only so many years to see and enjoy some particular species. This is a probing question that kind of preyed on me as I was working on the book. And again, my goal in writing this book was to describe birds that an average bird watcher stood a decent chance of seeing in Wisconsin in a year. But I had to ask, like, what does it mean if the number of birds is growing smaller and smaller? So there was a greater goal as I wrote, and that was clearly to increase appreciation for Wisconsin's birds, so that not just the folks on this call, but all the folks who might happen to pick up this book would appreciate them enough to join together and conserve them. Of course, the first step in preparing any field guide is deciding how many birds to include and which ones to include. And this is not as easy as it might seem on the face of it. because there's so many birds. According to the International Ornithological Committee, which publishes the IOC World Bird List, there are 10,787 species in the world. And according to the American Ornithological Society, as of July 2020, about 20% of that 10,000 species, or 2,158, have been recorded in North America. This thins the universe of birds to choose from quite a bit. If you were to look at other field guides, you would see that in National Geographic, the 7th edition, you could find over 1,023 birds. That's the 7th edition that I'm using there. And if you were to take a look through your Sibley guide, the 2nd edition, published in 2014, which excludes Hawaii, you would come across 923 species, a large number, and I think a representation of David's passion for seabirds. And if you were to pick up the 2nd edition of the Peterson Field Guide to Birds, you would come across 883. That's 807 species in the United States and Canada, and 76 in Hawaii. These are 3 well-known, widely available field guides, and each deserves a spot on the bookshelf of every Wisconsin birder. I have all of these books. But I was looking to write a field guide about Wisconsin's birds only, so I had to narrow the list further. And as I mentioned, to do that, I consulted Carl, and I asked him for the checklist published by the WSO in January of 2019. And that list lists 442 species, or about 20% of North American species, or 4% of the world's birds. This is the universe, finally, of birds that I could choose from. But not all 442 species are birds that an average bird watcher stands a decent chance of seeing in Wisconsin in a year. And as I'm sure you all can surmise, that's because 2 of them are extinct. The passenger pigeon and Carolina parakeet are on the Wisconsin list, even though they are no longer with us. And over 100 of the species on this list, of those 442, are not recorded every year. That, of course, is the casual and accidental species, both of which are seen only once or fewer than once every 5 years. So those are not birds that you can stand a good chance to see every year. Those are the 314 birds that are included by regular and rare species. And here is how I broke those down in my book. I included all 262 of the species that the WSO describes as regular. These are species that are found 8 or more times a year. I included 36 of the 52 species that are considered rare. That's found fewer than 8 times per year. And because I took the advice of Bill Miller, I included 1 casual species. That is purple sandpiper. He told me that it deserved a spot in my book because it, even though it was considered casual, it was reported along Lake Michigan nearly every year. And and it's funny, if you look back on eBird and you search for purple sandpiper, what you'll find is that purple sandpiper was seen at Manitowoc Lakefront in November of 2018. Nick Anich and Ryan Brady had a purple sandpiper on Maslowski Beach up in Ashland County in November of 2020. And if you're willing to expand our purview here for just a moment, another one was seen just across the Illinois border at North Point Marina, also in Lake County in Illinois, also in November of 2020. So Bill didn't steer me wrong, so I'm happy that that bird is in my books. That add them together, the regular, the rare, and that one casual, you come up with 299 species, or 67% of the birds on the Wisconsin checklist. Among them are all kinds of familiar backyard birds, and the birds that you see routinely on your when you go out birding: cardinals, black-capped chickadee, American goldfinch, American robin. And there are pairs of birds that traditionally cause all kinds of identification challenges, such as lesser and greater yellowlegs, sharp-shinned, and Cooper's hawk. And I was especially pleased that I was able to find among Brian's excellent photos two very comparable photos of the birds in there gliding, so that you could see how their wings are held in different ways. And of course, downy and hairy woodpecker. And again, this is just a great treat to work with a photographer who has taken so many photos that you can find two photos that are so similar that you can see a bird and get that profile shot. That makes it so easy not only to compare the bill length to the size of the bird's head, but also see those white outer tail feathers that are helpful to identify the two species. The field guide also includes a number of birds that, in my opinion, make Wisconsin, birding in Wisconsin so special. And at the top of the list is this one. Of all the field guides in the American Birding Association series of state field guides, only the Michigan book and only the Wisconsin book contains this warbler. Of course, the Kirtland's warbler spends the winter down in the Bahamas, and it is known to nest only in north central lower Michigan, only in the lower peninsula, in the upper peninsula of Michigan, in Ontario, and since 2007 in Wisconsin. Here's another bird that I think deserves a spot on this list. It's another bird that makes birding in Wisconsin special, and that's because the trumpeter swan is a humongous conservation success story. In the late 1880s, there was not one of these birds to be found in Wisconsin. And by 1932, only 69 remained in the continental United States. It's just incredible. Today, the Wisconsin population is about 6,000 or maybe a little more. I think that Sumner gave a talk to your club not too long ago about this very story. And the reason that the bird is doing so well in Wisconsin is because Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources biologists flew to Alaska and brought eggs back, incubated them, hatched them at the Milwaukee Zoo, and then reintroduced the species to Wisconsin between 1988 and 1997. The species was well established by the year 2000 and is now found year-round. It's just a magnificent story. I just really think it's the greatest ever. And here's another bird that deserves, that makes birding in Wisconsin so special. The whooping crane is one of North America's rarest birds. There's only 800 or so in the world, both in the wild and also in captive populations. Wisconsin is home to an experimental flock that was started in 2001. The birds were trained to fly from Wisconsin, from Neceda's National Wildlife Refuge to Florida behind ultralight aircraft. And for 15 years, that's what this program did. The program was discontinued in 2016, but the experimental flock, the members of the experimental flock still remain. In fact, in July of this year, 2021, they numbered 75 cranes. And the last thing that I could find this week when I wanted to update was that something from July that said that those 75 cranes, there were 66 in Wisconsin and 2 were in Michigan, and then 7 were unconfirmed. They made 21 nesting attempts and 2 re-nests, and they had hatched 14 chicks this year, and up to 6 were still alive. And last year, they achieved a pretty important first, which is pictured here. This is the first wild whooping crane chick to hatch and fledge at Horicon Marsh. The chick is there on the left, and on the right is mom. And the mother is interesting also because she is the first whooping crane known to overwinter in Wisconsin instead of migrating south. These 3 species certainly make birding in Wisconsin special. Another factor that makes birding in Wisconsin special is the state's location on the continent. This is a map of North America from the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. I like it because of the colors, which show ecological regions of from the Arctic Cordillera, the taiga and tundra up atop, which is shown in like blue and pale purple, all the way down to the tropical wet forests of Mexico down at the bottom in plum. And this here is, of course, Wisconsin. I've circled it not because I don't think anybody knows where we are, but because I wanted to highlight the fact that we have been blessed by our location on the continent. We are situated between 2 truly great lakes, Superior to the north and Michigan to our east. And between the 2 Great Lakes, we have about 1,000 miles of shoreline. And that shoreline provides all kinds of nesting habitat for terns, gulls, pelicans, cormorants, and other colonial birds. And in addition to that, it provides all kinds of marshes, especially in the western shore of Green Bay. And the shoreline, as all of us know, is magnificent for watching ducks and other waterfowl. In addition to the Great Lakes, there are over 12,000 rivers and streams. And the biggest one, of course, is the is the Mississippi River, which forms our western boundary. In addition to that, there's also 14,000 or more inland lakes. Many of these are in the North Woods, where you can find the greatest collection of kettle lakes in the world. And that fact is a chief reason why that's also where you can find one of the greatest concentrations of bald eagles in the world. But then even stepping back one step further, I think it pays to call to mind that Wisconsin is located at the intersection or near the intersection of 3 major continental ecological regions. This is simplified perhaps a bit too much for comfort, but to the north, there's the northern forest. And to our east and to our south, there is the eastern temperate forests. And to our west is the magnificent Great Plains. And because of this intersection, we birders, we Wisconsin birders, get to enjoy a truly wide assortment of birds, including northern species like the spruce grouse, all kinds of western visitors, such as the Wilson's phalarope, and a host of southern birds, like this beautiful yellow-breasted chat. In summary, thanks to the state's location, birders can easily find a huge assortment of birds in Wisconsin. And as I've mentioned already, when you're in Wisconsin, you always have someone to go birding with. And that's because the state has an active and welcoming birding community. The Wisconsin Society for Ornithology is largely to thank for that, because of its quarterly journal, its monthly newsletter, it's all the field trips that it puts on throughout the year, its excellent annual convention when we're not in a pandemic, and its online bookstore. These are all things that welcome birders and inform them, and you have to be aware that not every state is so fortunate to have that. In addition to the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, there's also 30 bird clubs, 17 Audubon chapters, and among those bird clubs is the Noel J. Cutright Bird Club And I just want you to know that I think that what you have done for birding is unique and valuable. And it makes Wisconsin a great place to go birding, because you provide an option for people who are looking for information about where to go if they want to start bird watching but don't know how or where to begin. In addition, we Wisconsin birders are able to take to the field, knowing that conservation and activism on behalf of the environment, and especially for birds, is our heritage. As I mentioned before, in Wisconsin, we bird in the footsteps of giants, of conservation heroes. There's a whole ton of them that I could mention, but in this talk, I'm going to highlight 6. The first in the upper left-hand corner belongs at the top of every list. That's Aldo Leopold. He is of course, he was the first professor of game management in the nation and the author of the beloved book, A Sand County Almanac. Alongside him there is Owen Grommy, former curator of birds and mammals at the Milwaukee Public Museum, and the Dean of U.S. Wildlife Artists. He his painting of shovelers was featured on the 1946 federal duck stamp. Fran and Frederick Hammerstrom were research fellows under Aldo Leopold, of course, and they are the people who identified the habitat needs of prairie chickens at a time when prairie chickens were on the verge of extinction in the state. If you've ever had the great pleasure of going out into the grasslands before the sun comes up and then being there when the prairie chickens start their booming and dancing, that is largely a pleasure that you can say thank you to the Hammerstroms for preserving for you. Laurie Otto is an activist against DDT poisoning and a proponent of native plants. And she and 8 other women called themselves the Wild Ones and inspired the formation of the organization that exists to this day, and that is a source of information and plants, native plants. And the fellow in the center on the bottom there needs no introduction, especially to this group. Noel was the 2-time president of the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology. He's the founder of the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory. He was instrumental in creating Bird City, Wisconsin. And he was a co-author and senior editor of the first Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas. And he's the founder of the River Edge Bird Club, which is now named in his honor. He had a way of inspiring everybody to be a birder, and that perhaps is his legacy. It's great. And then finally, there's Greg Septon, one of my heroes also, another former employee of the Milwaukee Public Museum. But for 30 years, he's been the director of the urban Peregrine Falcon recovery effort in Wisconsin. And because of his efforts, and largely his efforts alone, you can see a site like this in Wisconsin. The Peregrine Falcon was once extirpated in the state. As recently as 1964, you couldn't find one east of the Mississippi. But Greg released over 100 captive reared falcons, and he banded 1,100 wild produced falcons in the state. And today you can find peregrine falcons nesting on power plants, bridges, tall buildings, the Mississippi Bluffs, Rock Island, and lots of other locations. Here in Milwaukee, not far from where I'm sitting now, you can see peregrine falcons on the UWM campus because they nest in a box up on the Engineering and Mathematical Sciences building and have been for years. This year, Lightning, a male and an unbanded female, produced 4 eggs right around my birthday at the end of March. And the first egg hatched in early May. And 4 chicks were banded on May 24th, and they fledged between the 11th and the 16th of June. Lightning, by the way, is, they know from the bands on him that he has been visiting and using this site for 7 years. And they suspect, although because she's unbanded, they suspect that the female has been using has been occupying this site for 9 years. Pretty remarkable. And a huge success story, another thing that we can all be very proud of. Perhaps the greatest reason why Wisconsin is a great state for bird watching, though, is that you can find birds in every month of the year. And that holds true even in the colder months after most birds have flown south. To describe that, I thought maybe I would just point out a few of the things that you can look forward to between the months of September and February. These are not the times that most people think are comfortable for bird watching, but yet they're great times for birds. September, for example, is not only the month when broad-winged hawks migrate, forming kettles and moving south in the state, but it's when parasitic jaegers appear over Lake Superior and Lake Michigan. And as Carl mentioned, at the Jaegerfest, the WSO's annual trip up to Wisconsin Point on the shores of Lake Superior, they saw several of these birds, several parasitic jaegers, along with redneck phalarope and several Sabin's gulls. This was an event that, again, because the pandemic scotched all kinds of plans last year, they weren't able to hold it, but they were able to do it this year. It was between September 15th and September 19th, and very successful. And September also is a valuable time on the birding calendar because it's the month of the annual Birds and Art exhibition at the Lee Yawkey Woodson Art Museum in Wausau. This year's exhibition goes until the 28th of November. So if you haven't been to the show yet, you still have time. When you go, don't look for this painting because this one was from last year's show. I've included it here because it's by my buddy Ken Kaufman. It's a great egret. It's an oil painting that he did called Skipping Water, and it was in last year's show. October, here it is. October is, and especially late October, is when tundra swans pass through the state en route to their wintering grounds along the mid-Atlantic coast. Many, and we're talking like hundreds and maybe even thousands of swans rest on Green Bay, at the mouth of Fox River, and especially along the Mississippi. Last year in very late October and early November, there were reports of hundreds, if not thousands of swans, tundra swans, from the Trumpeter National Wildlife Refuge, Upper Mississippi River National Wildlife Refuge, and like the Brownsville Overlook on the other side of the river in Minnesota. Just an incredible spectacle. November, how about that? November is the month when this beautiful bird wanders east. Varied thrush, as I'm sure you all know, is not a Wisconsin breeder. It nests in the forests of Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. And most of that western population heads pretty much just straight south along the Pacific coast for the winter. But every year, a small number roams unpredictably southeastward across the continent. And some show up in the western Great Lakes, usually between November and February. And sure enough, there was a varied thrush that showed up at Retzer Nature Center in Waukesha as recently as February 22nd of 2021. And there was another one seen in very early in the year in Sussex in Waukesha County. And I was pretty happy to see that Dan Panetti photographed a bird that he saw in Thiensville in October of 2020 also. So these birds are coming, and it's we're approaching that time, and it's just one of the reasons why November is a great time to be looking for birds, because November is typically the month when all kinds of birds from the boreal forest and the Arctic arrive. Pine siskins, purple finches, common redpolls, white-winged and red crossbills, even grosbeaks, and a whole pile of others. And November is also pretty well known as the month when this guy typically likes to arrive. Snowy owls move south to escape the Arctic winter, and they usually arrive in mid-November when they arrive. It's unpredictable, of course. But when they do come, a lot of them can be seen for quite a while. Some of them will stay for as long as March. They search out airports and agricultural fields and coastal locations that are thought to resemble the wide open spaces where they breed up in the Arctic. The petroleum pier in Milwaukee here is a good spot to always see them. And things are also good in December. It's the month of the Christmas bird count, of course, or the start of the Christmas bird count, December 14th through January 5th of every year. And it's when golden eagles typically start to appear over the driftless area. And it's when great horned owls start hooting. And this hooting continues into January. And January is when the bald eagles gather along the Mississippi and Wisconsin River, making it a great reason, despite the cold, to head to Sauk Prairie or Prairie du Sac or Prairie du Chien or Ferryville or one of those spots out there out west, and to take advantage of the bald eagle watching days that occur always in January. It's just a great time to see these fantastic birds. February is a month of the great backyard bird count. It's when goldfinches start replacing their dingy greenish brown feathers that they wear when not breeding. And it's when the Peregrine Falcons typically arrive back in the box at the UWM Engineering and Mathematical Sciences building. And it's also when I'm always most tired of shoveling. This past year, I was so frustrated because I had run out of spots to put the snow. But the consolation prize for me was always hearing the first northern cardinal singing. So despite how tired I was of shoveling, I knew that the warmer days and more birds were not that far away. So it's an extraordinary collection of birds Wisconsin has, and each one of the species that I've included in this presentation today, you can find in the field guide. And again, I encourage you, if any one of these birds, any one of these specific species is meaningful to you, or if it's your favorite, or if you have a fond memory of it, or it's one that you haven't seen yet and you want to see soon, I urge you to ask yourself, what if you knew that you would be able to see and enjoy that species for only a limited time, maybe only for a few more years? How would you feel? I encourage you all to remember that conservation and environmental activism is our heritage. It is a proud part of Wisconsin's history. You and I truly do, when we go out into the field, we walk in the footsteps of conservation giants. These are people who took action when action was needed, and they succeeded. Now it's our turn. And that thought motivates me when I work with Carl and Brian and the others on Bird City, Wisconsin. And it certainly informs all of my thoughts when I'm working with Jen and Carl and the others at the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory. And certainly it motivated me as I wrote this book, because I thought if I could share this wonder of Wisconsin's birds with a wider audience, I thought that maybe we could build that constituency that's required to really conserve these species that are so hard pressed these days. So let's not let our predecessors down. If you are interested in learning more about the observatory and what it's doing, or the programs of Bird City, Wisconsin, I urge you to visit the websites that you can see here, birdcitywisconsin.org or wglbbo.org for the observatory. You can find each one of these organizations on Facebook. On Facebook, it's Bird City, Wisconsin. And for the observatory, you just type in and search for WGLBBO, and you will be hooked up to all kinds of information and people. And considering that the Christmas holidays are not too far off, and that my book is a very handy stocking stuffer, if you're interested in picking up a copy of my field guide, I urge you to look first at the WSO store. You can pick it up there and support the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology at the same time. If you're on the east side here, you can find an independent bookseller, Boswell Book Company, that has the book on its shelves right now. And you can also order it from Vireos Books. And if all of those three don't ring your bell, then you can resort to Amazon. With that, I think that I will stop talking now. And if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right, one and all, you're welcome to, I've given you permission to unmute yourself. So if you have questions, maybe Chuck, at this point too, if you want to stop sharing your screen, then we'll have the view of everyone on the screen at the same time.
All right.
Fire away, everyone. If you've got questions, feel free to ask at this point.
I'll ask that one question that I put up in there. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I was curious when you were picking the ones you included in the book. You had to leave out 16. What'd you pick? 36 out of 52 of the casual.
The rare, yeah.
The rare category.
Yeah.
How did you pick the six? What 16 did you leave out? At least some examples of the kinds of things you left out off that rare list.
Oh, nuts. That would have been good for me to anticipate this question, Carl.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have left you
I will say that you know, the number of species in the book was a subject of some negotiation with the publisher, and he would have preferred that I stick entirely to just the regular species. And that, of course, would have left out some very important birds, such as like the Kirtland's warbler and others. I mean, there's some pretty obvious birds that I think just have to be in the book. Kirtland's warbler at the top of the list, that would have been left out if I had followed that rule, you know, to the letter. So that's largely how they got in there. Some of the others that, you know, I'm sorry, Carl. I'm kind of.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But it's that sort of more the thought process than anything else.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
You know, it was there was a couple of factors. There was like, how often had the bird been seen recently? And I thought that eBird was really useful for that. Because there are some rare birds that are seen more often than others. And then there are also birds that if you left them out, people would say, holy smokes, why don't you have whooping crayons in the book, you know? And so that's how a large number of those rare species got into the book.
Okay. Anybody else? A lot of people still muted. Anybody that wants to pop up with a question? How many books in the ABA series? Are they going to try and do all 50 states or?
I don't think so. I think that there's about 20 now, and I think that they'll probably be the publisher will be making sort of the same kind of calculus that we made the magazine all the time. That there are some states that you know, there's just not really a market for books like that in all of them,
Right.
And that is something that he's keeping a careful eye on, and I'm, you know, can't fault him for that.
Places where there's somebody to write the book too, I suspect, is what you need.
Yeah, and yes, good thought. That's exactly right, because you know, if they wanted someone who was familiar with the topic and familiar with the area and with an obvious interest in birds. This is another thing where he and I had a lot of similarities in you know, him creating this book series and me editing the magazine, because I could frequently find people who knew all kinds of stuff about birds, but couldn't write very well. And I could find all kinds of people who were very, very good writers, but they didn't know beans about birds, you know? So I always thought of like this as being like two universes that overlap. And I'm looking for that little group of people in the center here who not only can understand the subject, but have the skill to be able to put it into words. So, you know, and in like Hawaii's case, he was on the Rainses, who are very talented and very knowledgeable people. Nick Lund is not only very knowledgeable about birds, but he's actually kind of a witty and fun writer. It was fun to edit those books, and it was especially fun to edit Nick's because it showed me that I could have had a lot more fun writing my own book. But it was great. I look forward to that coming out. It's going to be.
It will be very, very good that Chuck is on the what's called the publications committee for the Breeding Bird Atlas, because he's going to bring a lot of insight into helping us pick the authors for all of the species that will be in the Breeding Bird Atlas, and that will be a challenge, and hopefully he'll be writing some of those as well. So
Yeah, I look forward to it.
yeah.
When do you anticipate that will be coming out?
The Atlas?
Right.
Well, we had a steering committee meeting today talking about that. It's two things have slowed us down somewhat. COVID has made it more difficult to do lots of things. And eBird, we've used eBird for all of the data collection for the Atlas. They created a separate Wisconsin eBird Atlas portal for us to collect the field work and everything like that. And that all that data has required a great deal of vetting, and some of that vetting, the ability to adjust codes and to overwrite some observations, because not all data collectors are equally talented, and there's some funny stuff that creeps into big data, and you need to be able to vet and proof all of that. And some of those tools that we needed from eBird were delayed by up to 18 months because eBird was in the process of, eBird is run on a platform called Oracle, which people who know software know. And they had a contract renewal coming up at a very steep escalation in price. And so they put all of their best software engineers to work moving the whole, I don't know how many terabytes of data and all the programming onto a new platform. And it cost us some time in doing that. Having said that, we never expected that let's see, the first Atlas data was collected from 1995 through 2000, which was 6 years, and it was 6 more years before the book published. It was the book published in 2006.
Wow.
Our goal was 2019 was the 5th field year, and if we could cut that to 5 years, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, maybe by late 2024 we might have a book. I'm not sure we're going to make that, but that's what we would hope. We shall see. Work on the book cover is coming along. I think people will be very interested to see the cover of the book when it comes out. Then artist has been contracted for that work. Most of the data vetting is pretty well complete. We have a publisher picked out, but not a contract finalized yet. So anyway, it's coming along, but it's the actual writing of the individual chapters has not actually begun yet until the data is all complete. One of the big developments was a postdoc fellow working with Professor Ben Zuckerberg at University of Wisconsin-Madison has been brought on board, paid for by the DNR. He will be turning all of the point count data into what are called thunderstorm maps. If you've ever seen a thunderstorm map, if you look at, here's the difference. If you look at a map from the first Atlas and are asked where red-eyed vireos breed in Wisconsin, they breed everywhere. You know, that looks like they're in every county. Well, they are. They're in almost every county in the state. You do a thunderstorm map, you see the reds from the oranges, from the yellows, from the blues, from the greens, and you see that red-eyed vireos breed predominantly up in the forests of northeastern, northwestern Wisconsin, and in isolated other areas where they're very heavily forested. And we didn't do point counts for the first atlas. The second atlas will have them, and so it'll be a whole new set of sophisticated data, and we'll take a special person to do that. So anyway, I got sidetracked there, but that's
Sounds like quite an improvement. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
it will be the best atlas produced to date.
Wow,
So
excited to see it.
Yeah.
So we just got a question about whether or not Chuck's book will be carried at River Edge's bookstore. And we are certainly looking into that, and check back with me. I'm not sure right now, but certainly we'll try to get it in.
great question. Appreciate it. Any other questions? Well, Chuck, we thank you very much. I really do appreciate that talk full circle back to that question that Bill Volker posed. It's something we all need to be thinking about. So a round of applause for Chuck.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much.
Great talk, Chuck. Great talk.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for attending, and hope to see you again the first Tuesday in November. And this Saturday out at Forest Beach.
Thanks, Carl.
Take care. Good night. Thank you, Chuck.
Fingers for good weather.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Enjoy the hawk.
Weather's supposed to be good Saturday.
Yay.
Excellent.
Good to hear.
Thank you.
Have a great night. Thanks, Chuck.